Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. I walked into the city archives building for the last time, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. My laptop was in my hand, the work I'd done for the last 2 decades now handed off to someone else. I felt nothing. I pulled out the ring of keys from my pocket. Keys I'd labeled by hand, the ink faded but still legible. Each one had a purpose, a piece of this building, this system that I'd built from the ground up. The last key was brass, worn smooth from years of use. The Master Records Vault key. I placed it on the counter in front of the clerk. He glanced down at it. No recognition in his eyes. No questions. He took the key, slid it into a drawer, and I left without another word. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, but then it buzzed again. Head archivist's name flashing on the screen. I answered. "Why are we locked out of our own vault?" His voice was frantic. I didn't hesitate. "You told me to return all property," I said. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. They had no idea what they were missing. Back in 2003, when the city couldn't secure a proper lease for the records vault, I'd stepped up, signed my name on the dotted line. It wasn't my job to keep the city's records safe, but someone had to. I didn't expect credit for it. Hell, I didn't expect recognition. But I got the vault secured. I handled everything: security access, digitization, pest control, mold remediation. The real work. And they never even bothered to update the lease. I'd reminded a supervisor about it in 2011. He'd laughed, said, "Guess you technically run the place." I didn't mind the joke. But the truth was, I'd been running it for years without anyone acknowledging it. Not even when I signed that lease, just paperwork to them. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago. The calendar invite came through. Quick sync, room 2B. No subject, no details. I knew what it was about. The new deputy director and HR were waiting. They wasted no time. "Your role has been evaluated as duplicative," they said. Their eyes didn't meet mine. "We're restructuring." They slid a severance packet across the table. No handshake, no thank you. Just that cold corporate formality. "Return all city property by end of day." I'd trained half that department, including the woman now sitting across from me, the one with deputy on her nameplate. I smiled. "Do you know who's listed on the vault lease?" I asked. Their silence said everything. They didn't know. They didn't care. I didn't need to ask for the severance. I already knew the price of their disregard. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. 2 weeks later, I showed up at the city property office with a folder marked Vault Lease Termination. Ray, the clerk, did a double take. "Miranda, you're still listed?" I handed over the paperwork. 22 years worth of amendments and renewals, all signed by me. "They didn't renew," I said. "So I'm ending it." By 10 a.m., the locks were changed. By noon, the deputy director was blowing up my phone. I didn't answer. I'd filed the termination order. The space was already reassigned to a nonprofit legal group that had been waiting 6 years for access. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. 2 days later, the cracks began to show. Jorge, the facilities tech, messaged me. "Do you still have admin access to the humidity control system?" Of course I did. They never removed me from the shared vendor portal. When I didn't answer, Jorge followed up. "Nothing's working. Vault temp hit 90 today." I didn't respond. They didn't know what they were up against. The cooling system I had rerouted in 2015 to avoid false alarms? Nobody else knew how it worked. No one knew about the manual override code either. I didn't need to make things worse, but I wasn't going to fix it either. The silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. And they were finally hearing it. 2 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a calendar invite labeled Quick Sync, Room 2B. No details. I already knew what was coming. The deputy director and HR were waiting when I walked in. I sat down across from them without a word. They didn't ask me how I was. They didn't offer a handshake. Just a stiff silence as they shuffled some papers around. Then the deputy director cleared his throat and said, "Your role has been evaluated as duplicative." He didn't even look me in the eye. "This is part of a restructuring." I had to stop myself from rolling my eyes. Restructuring? Same tired corporate bullshit. I'd been through this before, just not in the same seat. Not the one getting kicked out. The HR rep pushed a severance packet across the table. It was a thick, glossy thing. Probably cost the city more to print than it was worth. They didn't even wait for me to reach for it. No, thank you for your years of service, or anything that would have made this feel like it mattered. They just dropped the packet in front of me and stared. "Return all city property by end of day," the deputy director said. His tone was final. No room for negotiation. I smiled. It was a small thing, just enough to acknowledge what I already knew. They had no clue what they'd just done. Sure, I said, and slid the packet aside. They were too busy reading their notes to notice my smile. They didn't realize that I wasn't just some faceless employee they could brush aside. They thought the vault was just some room full of files. They had no idea it was mine, signed, sealed, and locked down. Back in 2003, when the city couldn't secure a proper records vault, I signed on the dotted line. Not as a city official, not as anything more than a mid-level employee who was sick of watching everyone stall. I wasn't even in the department at the time. I'd been running the tech side. But I pushed through, signed that lease personally to make sure the records got secured. They'd needed someone to keep the process moving. I was the only one who cared enough to step up. I'd reminded a supervisor about it once in 2011. He laughed and said, "Guess you technically run the place." I didn't need the credit. It was just part of the job no one else wanted to take, but I kept it going. I was the one who coordinated security access, digitized the files, cleaned up the mold. I wasn't on the org chart. Hell, no one even knew how deep I was into it. And they never bothered to update the lease. I didn't expect them to know that now. They were too busy slapping their shiny new titles around, trying to restructure everything they couldn't be bothered to understand. I stood up to leave. "I'll make sure the property's returned," I said. The deputy director nodded, checking his watch. As I turned to go, HR gave me a look, like she expected me to be emotional about the whole thing. She probably thought I was about to beg. I didn't beg. I didn't need to. When the door closed behind me, I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. There it was, official. Not that I hadn't seen it coming, but the way they acted like I was just another cog being removed, it hit differently this time. Maybe because I'd spent more time building this place than they'd spent in any of their roles. I wasn't angry, not really. I was too tired for that. But the realization hit me. They hadn't just overlooked me. They'd erased me. I wasn't part of the system anymore. They didn't even know they needed me. That I could work with. It was early June when I first noticed the problem. I was processing vendor payments, going through the usual motions, when something seemed off. The renewal notice for the records facility, the one I got every year without fail, was missing. Normally, I'd have that in my inbox before Memorial Day. But this year, nothing. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe it was just a delay. But by mid-June, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I checked the shared inbox. Empty. I checked the archives. Nothing. No notification, no reminder, not a single mention of it. That's when I went digging. I opened my backup folder. Technically, it was against policy, but without those files, nothing got done. I knew where everything was. Lease amendments, renewals, old contracts. There it was, buried in the old folder, the original lease, signed in my name. I leaned back in my chair and reread it. I didn't need to. I knew it by heart. But there it was, plain as day. Section 9B. If renewal is not filed in writing by July 1st, the space reverts to the leaseholder's discretion. I could have warned them, could have mentioned it to the new deputy director, or flagged it in some meeting. Hell, I could have just sent an email, "Hey, make sure you get that renewal in." But I didn't. I wasn't being vindictive. I was done saving people who didn't even see me. They didn't see the work I put in, didn't see the countless hours I spent fixing problems that weren't even mine to fix. They hadn't even noticed when I signed that damn lease years ago. And now they wouldn't notice the mess they were about to walk into. Not until it was too late. I sat there for a minute, staring at the screen, the city's records facility, a place I'd kept running, a place I'd built, and they hadn't even bothered to check the lease. They didn't care. They didn't care about the foundation of the office, just about filling the next shiny new position that looked good on a PowerPoint. I closed the file without making a sound. The next few weeks felt like a countdown, every day ticking closer to July 1st. I didn't do anything to speed up the process. Didn't give them a hint. I just let the clock run its course. By the time I got the severance packet, by the time I knew I was officially on the way out, I felt it. A strange calm. Not relief, not anger, but something in between. The weight of all those years, all the work, all the things I had carried quietly, now slipping away. The thing they'd never known they needed was finally fading. And I wasn't going to stop it. When I stood up from that meeting, I had a small smile on my face. The pieces were in motion. The vault wasn't just going to be locked. It was going to be gone. And I wasn't lifting a finger to help. I'd already done my part. They just hadn't been paying attention. They still wouldn't. On August 1st, I walked into the city property office with a folder labeled Vault Lease Termination. The clerk, Ray, was behind the counter when I pushed open the door. He looked up, did a double take, and blinked. Miranda? You're still listed, he asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. I dropped the folder on the counter, the thick stack of documents sliding toward him. He didn't touch it right away. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, like he wasn't sure if this was real or just some kind of joke. I didn't smile, but I didn't need to. 22 years worth of amendments, signed renewals, and payment receipts, I said, all pointing to me. They didn't renew, so I'm ending it. Ray flipped through the papers, each one confirming what I'd already said. His eyes flicked between the folder and me, like he was trying to piece together what he'd missed. Finally, he glanced up, still trying to process. You're sure about this? I nodded once. It's done. By 10 a.m., the locks on the vault were changed. By noon, the deputy director started blowing up my phone. I let it ring. I wasn't interested in hearing it. I didn't care about the pleas, the frantic voicemail messages, the urgent emails. I had already filed the termination order. The records facility was officially no longer under the city's control. The space was being reallocated to a nonprofit legal foundation that had been waiting 6 years for access. They had their paperwork in order. They'd been waiting while the city fumbled around with its endless meetings and reorganization plans. I didn't respond to any of it. I went home, lit a candle, and made tea. It felt like the kind of quiet day you get after a storm when everything settles and you finally breathe. No rush, no distractions, no apologies. And I wasn't being petty either. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about being spiteful. It was just closure. They had written me off, ignored the years of work I'd put in, and now they were going to feel it. It wasn't personal. It was just how things had to go. The space wasn't even the point anymore. It wasn't about the vault, the records, or the files. It was about the truth they'd avoided for too long. I was the one who had made it work. And now, they'd have to live with the mess. 2 days later, I got a message from Jorge, the facilities tech. It popped up on my phone. Do you still have admin access to the humidity control system? Of course I did. They never removed me from the shared vendor portal. Not that it would have mattered if they had. I had every password, every access code, everything I'd set up and maintained over the years. I didn't reply. What was the point? I wasn't about to bail them out of this mess. Jorge followed up a few minutes later, his message more urgent this time. Nothing's working. Vault temp hit 90 today. I paused before I read it again. The vault temperature. They had no idea what was happening. None of them. Not a single person in that office understood how the vault cooling system worked. I'd rerouted it back in 2015, after the city kept triggering false alarms every time the air conditioning cycled. The problem wasn't the system, it was their lack of understanding. The humidity and temperature needed to stay just right or the records would be damaged. They didn't realize that either. No one did. It was all about the numbers, the budgets, the metrics, but the rerouting, the override code for the cooling system, that was something I'd set up. And they had no clue how to fix it. They didn't even know what was wrong. They hadn't even known it needed to be fixed. I sat back in my chair, feeling the quiet stretch around me. I didn't feel sorry for them. I wasn't angry either. I just felt something like relief. The city's main archive room, it was overheating. The backup systems were failing. They couldn't get into the equipment closet because, surprise, surprise, I was the only one with the override code. When I didn't respond to Jorge's messages, I could almost hear the silence building at the archives. And that was the thing. It wasn't about being petty. I wasn't out to make them pay for their dismissal of me. I wasn't interested in dragging it out, even if I could have. But sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. And now, they were finally hearing it. They had relied on me for everything, whether they acknowledged it or not. And now they were realizing just how much of the structure I had held up. A few days later, Lisa from finance, a newer face, asked if we could meet for coffee. I wasn't sure why she wanted to talk, but I agreed. She showed up at the cafe, clearly nervous but trying to hide it. Her fingers wrapped around her cup, tapping lightly as she stared into it for a moment before speaking. I wasn't part of what happened, she started, her voice quiet, but I'm sorry for how they treated you. I nodded, but I didn't say anything. There was no point in rehashing it. What was done was done. She wasn't the one who had to face the fallout. She hesitated, then added, I've been trying to sort out the mess over there. Could you help fix it? You know, get things back on track? I took a slow sip of my coffee, studying her face. She was sincere, I could see that, but I wasn't going to do their job for them. Not anymore. Not after how they'd treated me. Do you know who's listed on your property insurance? I asked. She blinked, the question catching her off guard. No. Should I? That's the problem, I said. No one knows. No one bothered to understand what I did. No one cared enough to even ask. Her eyes widened, and I saw the realization hit her. She had no idea how much I'd been holding together. The records, the contracts, the systems. She didn't know the fundamentals of what I had managed for years. No one did. They thought it was all just part of the job. They'd never recognized the foundation until it started to crack. Lisa bit her lip, looking guilty. I didn't mean to. I held up a hand. It's not you. It's just that they don't see it. They never did. The silence between us grew thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She wasn't asking for more than I could give, and I wasn't offering to fix something that wasn't my problem anymore. I could have helped, could have stepped in and made everything work again. But I wasn't interested in rejoining their broken system. I was done doing that. I was writing my own transition plan now, for myself. The only thing I was focused on was the path forward, not the mess behind me. I'm sorry, she said again, softer this time. But I get it now. Thanks for talking to me. I gave her a nod, but I didn't say anything else. She needed to learn what the others hadn't. Sometimes you don't see what's right in front of you until it's already gone. The word spread fast. The vault was off limits. Systems were crashing. No one could get into the cooling equipment. The backup protocols failed. Vendors stopped responding to their frantic calls. I could hear the scramble all the way from my kitchen table, where I sat with my laptop, sipping my tea. I wasn't surprised. Then came the emails. HR sent out mass requests to all former staff, begging for documentation on system access, contract contacts, anything that could help them fix the disaster they were now facing. But it was too late. They'd ignored everything for too long. Jorge texted me again. They're trying to pry open the breaker panel. I refused to help. I didn't need to ask for details. I could imagine it all perfectly. Them standing around, looking at that old, beaten-up breaker panel, clueless. It was almost poetic, really. They didn't know how to fix it. They didn't even know what needed fixing. I didn't respond. Not long after, Nathan, the deputy director, sent me an email. The subject line read, "Urgent, seeking mutual resolution." I didn't open it. Didn't need to. I didn't reply. I had nothing to say. I could have helped. Could have picked up the phone, given them the answers, told them how to navigate the mess they'd created. But I didn't. Not because I was trying to be petty. Not because I was angry or holding a grudge. I didn't respond because I finally understood something I'd never let myself believe before. They were finally treating me like I'd always been, irreplaceable. They hadn't seen it before, hadn't appreciated it, not when it counted. But now they were begging for what I had kept running all these years, and the truth was inescapable. Without me, they couldn't function. I sat there, reading Nathan's desperate email, thinking about all the years I spent keeping things from falling apart, keeping them moving smoothly. They had always overlooked that, taken it for granted. But now it was clear. They needed me. They didn't know how to fix what was broken. And for the first time in all this time, I felt the weight of that realization. I hit delete on August 22nd. The city received the final notice. Vault lease terminated, space reassigned. I didn't feel anything when I saw the confirmation email come through. I was done with all of it. No more emotional attachment, no more fighting for acknowledgement. That same day, Nathan showed up at my house. I saw him from the window as I was finishing my coffee. He stood in my driveway, hands in his pockets, staring at my front door for what felt like a lifetime. 5 minutes. He didn't knock, didn't move, just stood there, probably running through his list of scripted apologies in his head. I didn't go to the door. I didn't even open the blinds. I just sat there, watching him stand there like he had all the time in the world, until he finally turned and walked back to his car. No words, nothing. The board chair's assistant called me later that afternoon. "The city council wants to talk, off the record," she said. I didn't need to hear the rest. "I'm not interested," I told her, and hung up. By the end of the month, the archives were falling apart. People started quitting. The team scattered like rats on a sinking ship. The tension in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Internal emails leaked, mostly about the vault, mostly about their lack of understanding of what had been in place all along, how they couldn't even get basic things right without me there to hold it all together. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or just shake my head at how quickly everything started unraveling. I took a break from the chaos and opened my old email archive. It was a small act of nostalgia, one last trip down memory lane. And there it was, the original welcome message I'd received when I first joined the team. It was from the director at the time, before anyone had ever thought about restructuring, before anyone had dismissed me or overlooked me. It said, "Thanks for believing in us. We'll never forget." I printed it out, the words still crisp on the page, even if the ink was fading a little. I taped it to my fridge, right where I could see it every day. A reminder of the person I had been back then, the one who had given so much of herself to make the place work. A reminder of the person they'd forgotten along the way. I didn't need their acknowledgement anymore. I didn't need their thanks. I had already done what I set out to do. But every time I looked at that note, I remembered they'd forgotten, but I hadn't, and that, in the end, was enough. September 5th, Eviction Day. I stood at my window, coffee in hand, watching the new tenants, Justice Works Legal Fund, move in. The old vault space was cleared out, the stacks of records and boxes now just empty shells. The cooling units were shut off, the city staff officially removed. The place I'd spent so much time building, keeping intact, was now in someone else's hands. Nathan had tried one last time, an email with no subject line. "I made a mistake. You were the structure." It wasn't an apology. It was a recognition of the collapse that had already happened. I didn't reply. Some acknowledgments come too late. Jorge sent me a photo of my old desk, still sitting in the corner of the now empty office. There was a sticky note on it. "Miss you already." I pulled out my closure folder from the drawer. Everything was sealed, signed, and completed. The termination notice, the reassignment paperwork, all of it. I ran my fingers over the folder, feeling the weight of it. Final, irreversible. The new team had sent a thank you gift, a little framed card with a message. "You made this possible." I stared at it for a minute before I set it down on the counter. Then I hung the old brass vault key by my door. Not because it opened anything anymore, but because it proved I mattered. It had always meant more than just a key to a vault. It was a reminder of what I had built, of what they'd lost. I stepped back from the door, taking a moment to just look at it all. The key, the photo, the little thank you. Then I grabbed my coat, slipped out the front door, and locked it behind me. I wasn't looking back anymore.